Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity to address this August gathering happening in October. A lot has been said about consequent management, and I'm very sure that everyone in this room is an expert in that, guys, because of what you do in that regard. But I'm here to bring the civil society perspective. And having worked for SERAP, which is the Economic Rights and Accountability Project, for a while, I've come to see in practical terms how these affects the everyday Nigerian, including everyone in this room. I will not repeat what has been said about consequent management, but like to speak to what perhaps appears to be the question of the missing link. And I'm very happy that that was phrased as part of the topic for this discussion. And I certainly agree that there is a missing link in our bid for economic reform and development in Nigeria. I do agree with Mr. Uzo that every reform needs a robust consequent management framework. And that one of the key things it requires, and also echoed by the EFCC, is transparency and accountability. And that is what we've been doing at SERAP over the years to ensure that government is accountable to the people. The problem, it would appear, is not lack of a legal framework, as many would perhaps say. A lot will say there's a lot wrong with the Constitution and our laws. I do sincerely believe that the challenge is a lack of a political will to implement those laws. And I define political will to be the willingness of anybody who has power, whether in private or public sphere, to enact a policy, do an act, irrespective of his or her interest or the collective interest. Looking at the various mechanisms we have to bring about consequent management in Nigeria, we would see that if half of these agencies are allowed to work, perhaps the conversation we'll be having will be how to make it better. And perhaps we will not call it a missing link, but how to make it much more effective. We have the Office of the Auditor General, for instance, of the Federation, which is also replicated at the states, in all the states of the Federation, that ensures and does what everybody in this room perhaps does very well, which is to audit federal government agencies. In 2017, the Office of the Auditor General said that 3.5 trillion naira could not be accounted for by more than 80 ministries, departments, and agencies of government. That amount for the year that followed it is perhaps almost 50% of the total budget for 2018. Those funds are yet to be recovered. That is repeated with the figure going up a bit in 2018, 2019, up till 2021, which is the last report we've had from the Auditor General. So if these reforms that the Nigerian government is going about or claims to be doing is to bear fruits, we should plug those holes. And I'm not an accountant, but I do like the way the Auditor General frames his recommendations in his reports, which I spent a lot of time reading. He always recommends two things: a recovery of those funds and the punishment, or perhaps call it prosecution, of those who I find liable for how those funds have left. I also like to speak to one of those agencies of government that forms part of the public financial management, which also forms of the consequent management processes in Nigeria. That is the Public Accounts Committee of the National Assembly, who has the mandate to examine the reports of the Auditor General and make resolutions after submitting his report to the National Assembly. Over the years, those reports have not been able to deliver anything meaningful because resolutions have not brought about any prosecutions or, in fact, any recoveries of those funds. Presently, SERAP has more than 32 lawsuits in court against various institutions of government, out of which 15 is on the Auditor General's report. And if perhaps there are government institutions in this room that we are yet to take to court for not being transparent and accountable, we can have a conversation before the end of this program, and we'll make sure you join that list. We've had instances where we've used the Freedom of Information Act to make requests of government agencies who refuse to provide us information, and we go to court. Sometimes we spend 5 years litigating these issues, and we get judgment. A very good one will be the one we got against the Nigerian government, particularly the Ministry of Finance. The Nigerian government had taken a loan, I think in 2015, to install CCTV and other security infrastructure in Abuja. The loan was in excess of $200 million from the Chinese government. We had sent a Freedom of Information request to the Ministry of Finance to tell us how those funds had been spent. We did not get a response. We went to court. Interestingly, lawyers came to court from the ministry, defended the suit, and the judge ruled in our favor 3 years ago, mandating the government to merely disclose how those funds had been spent. That judgment is yet to be obeyed. That tells you clearly some of the issues that we talk about when we talk about consequent management. Very interesting, it was during the prosecution of that case that a lawyer in one of the ministries, not for that particular case, accosted one of our lawyers on the corridor after the case and said, "We like what you are doing, please keep it up." Note that this lawyer is from the Ministry of Justice defending another case that Serap had brought against the federal government. That means we all know that we are victims, as it were, of lack of proper implementation of consequence management. We can go on and on about the evils lack of consequence management brings, but I'd like to bring it closer home as to how this affects us as Nigerians. That 3.5 trillion naira that was missing and unaccounted for from the 2016 budget, which forms the basis of the 2017 report by the Auditor General, can build at least one public health center in all the states of the Federation. And that would mean that a lot of people that get to die because they do not have access to good health care would have been saved. It will improve maternal mortality. It would reduce, maternal mortality. Because primary health care centers should take care of those kind of issues in the various places where people reside in Nigeria. And that also means that a lot of money is, I would like to say stolen, but you would require me to add allegedly. And since I understand what defamation means, I will use the word used by the Auditor General in his report. Missing. Now, where are those funds? We send a lot of freedom of information requests to ministries, departments, and agencies simply to ask questions. Most times, we do not get responses. Our response rate to FY from Serap is less than 5%. That is, only 5% of the agencies of government that we send FYs to ever respond. And the positive response in terms of quality information is less than 1%. Mind you, this is simply a request for information. And that is why we got a judgment against the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs 3 years ago, mandating that ministry to simply provide details of the amount that had been spent, providing succor and social incentives protection for the vulnerable in Nigeria. That judgment, as I speak, is also yet to be obeyed. So we were not surprised subsequently about what happened in that ministry. That was just 1 year after we got that judgment. And for those who may say, why do we go to court so much at Serap? It is because of the kind of conversations we're having here, which is, how do we ensure that consequent management, effective implementation of consequence management, in parts of the reforms government claims to be doing, enough that we all benefit. The irony of the loss of power that occurred, I think, 1 or 2 hours ago wasn't lost on me, and I think everybody in this hall as well. How much was used to renovate this present hall? The last time I was here in person was, I think it should be in the 2000s. I remember it was President Obasanjo then. This is my second time here. The first time after the renovation. Who is the contractor? What was the process, the bidding process that existed in the Procurement Act to allocate that contract? How was it done? These are questions that we would ask by way of freedom of information request. Not necessarily to say there is corruption, but because the law requires these kinds of information to be in the public domain. Which is why the Freedom of Information Act mandates public institutions to proactively disclose information about their activities in several ways. On their website, through bulletins, and also to respond to such requests when any citizens make such a request. And that is why SERAP goes to court to compel these institutions to provide that information. And that is why I believe that if we can solve that missing link, the reforms that government claims to be undertaking, I believe, will bear much more fruit. So that renewed hope agenda does not end up being renewing private pockets, but renewing the hope for the Nigerian people. And it's very important to say that while transparency and accountability, or the lack of it, in other words, do not necessarily mean corruption, we can all agree they encourage corruption. And that is why the Freedom of Information Act mandates proactive disclosure of such of government activities. I would like to speak briefly about the role of the judiciary in consequent management. And I do believe that consequent management is not only punitive in its outlook, which is why I like some of the mandates of two particular anti-corruption agencies, the ICPC and the EFCC. They have public education mandates in their laws that allows them to prevent corruption by educating the public, not necessarily prosecuting them. But what happens more often than not that incapacitates the judiciary is still the lack of transparency and accountability that has brought about even the slow pace of judicial proceedings and hindered the administration of criminal justice. That means that whatever has escaped the Accountant General, whatever has escaped the Auditor General, whatever has escaped the various institutions that should ensure public financial management as part of consequence management, may end up also escaping the gavel of the judge in court. Because the judge writes in longhand in every proceedings. There are courts in Nigeria that don't have functioning air conditioning system. They do take the light in court as well. I've seen that happen a lot. And I've seen judges who have told lawyers to remove their wig and gowns so that we can proceed with proceedings in the absence of light, so that the lawyers don't die of suffocation. This has happened to me in court several times. So it means a case that should take 1 year to determine the culpability of somebody that's stolen public funds lasts sometimes 3-5 years. That is at the court of first instance. And that also means that the credible evidence that the judges need, including the infrastructure to do their job, doesn't exist. And that is why we must understand that consequence management, or the lack of it in Nigeria, the missing link we've come to identify, is everybody's business. And we must ensure that in our private capacities, we need to ramp up our advocacy to public officers to make sure that they do what we've elected or they've been appointed to do while in public office. I will close by saying that the kind of advocacy we need in Nigeria should be devoid of three things. There should be no politics involved. Tribalism must be absent, and it should not have any religious fervor in it. If we can do that, no, the applause makes me think I'm one politician, that there is a particular politician that has praise singers in the crowd every time he says something. Those three evils that I've come to call them, politics, tribe, and religion, mars the advocacy we do to hold government accountable. And that means that if your political party holds power in your state or local government, you do not see anything wrong in what they do. It means if perhaps the governor is of your ethnic extraction, it means he's a good guy. And if he's a Christian or Muslim, depending on how you believe, he or she can do no wrong. Those things mask the advocacy that we do to ensure that the benefit of good governance comes to everyone. And if you ask me, have we been able to ensure that those who have stolen public funds get their just deserts, the punishment we need? The answer is a no. And that perhaps is why they took light. We lost power here 1 or 2 hours ago. And that is why perhaps you spend a lot on generators than you spend on things that should actually benefit you. And that is why we have come to have this conversation today, to ensure that we all, as responsible citizens and seasoned professionals, do our part to hold government accountable. Thank you very much.